Barely 20 minutes after it took off, a nearby commercial ship witnessed an aircraft catch fire and explode mid-air, leaving a massive pool of oil and debris on the surface. According to the legend, Columbus traversed the triangle and witnessed supernatural fireballs plunging into the sea, while his ship's compasses inexplicably malfunctioned. We all know the rules of the ocean's most infamous hunting ground. Planes vanish into thin air, glowing waters swallow entire fleets, and compasses spin wildly out of control. It is an area of absolute, unpredictable peril. Yet, this map shows the highly detailed official navigational charts for the North Atlantic Ocean. If you look closely at the region spanning Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda, you will notice what is missing. There is no marked zone of supernatural hazard. Every single day, international shipping authorities and the U.S. Coast Guard allow hundreds of commercial and private vessels to sail directly through this exact corridor. They do not issue a single warning. If we require signs for wet floors in a grocery store, a maritime zone prone to supernatural vanishments would certainly warrant a public advisory. The massive gap between the terrifying public perception of this area and the mundane daily routine of thousands of sailors reveals an uncomfortable truth. The triangle is a media invention, not a geographical feature. Prior to 1950, no one considered this patch of water to be abnormally dangerous. Ships sank and planes crashed, but authorities viewed these as isolated, tragic consequences of navigating the sea, completely uncorrelated with one another. When a commercial airliner goes down over the ocean, it leaves physical evidence. Search and rescue teams know to look for oil slicks, floating luggage, or the shimmering trails of jet fuel to mark the crash site. Within the geographic boundaries of the Bermuda Triangle, stretching between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, that physical trace vanishes. Planes disappearing here leave no wreckage. Conventional wisdom suggests they suffer mechanical failure and sink to the deep ocean floor, permanently hidden by the Atlantic. A standard impact with the seabed still leaves an acoustic signature and chemical residue. The absolute absence of these markers points to a systematic three-phase process of reality erasure, starting with the cabin environment, moving through mechanical failure, and ending in a total collapse of physical space. To see exactly how this sequence operates, we have to look inside the cabin of a doomed aircraft, like Flight 914, and reconstruct its final moments from the inside out. The process begins with a heavy atmospheric shift inside the cabin. Passengers feel a sudden crushing pressure, accompanied by a silence that defies the laws of standard cabin altitude physics. Outside the window, the ocean surface transforms. The water stops reflecting sunlight in random ripples and forms rigid, morphing geometric shapes that appear highly intentional. This geometric shift triggers the onset of severe, unnatural turbulence. The plane drops several feet at a time, acting as the region's first physical strike against the aircraft. The environment is actively waking up, shifting its fundamental geometry to isolate the aircraft from the natural laws of the outside world. The second phase triggers an aggressive atmospheric blackout. Thick gray clouds swallow the plane instantly, accompanied by lightning that produces absolutely no sound. A cascading technological failure spreads through the aircraft. Passenger phones lose all signal, the Wi-Fi instantly disconnects, and the cabin lights dim as the plane is drained of its electrical power. The pilots lose all navigational control. The compasses spin endlessly in circles, unable to lock on to the magnetic poles of the planet. The engines briefly fail, sending the plane into a terrifying silence before they roar back with a tilted, unrecoverable downward pitch. This mechanical sabotage completes the isolation of the aircraft, severing every physical and communicative tie it has to the outside world. Deep, pulsing blue bioluminescence rises from the depths. Enormous, indistinct shapes move beneath the ocean surface, reacting to the plane's proximity. An ancient, massive structure rises from the water, positioning itself directly in the falling plane's path. The atmosphere itself begins to physically warp and tear. The clouds in the sky stretch like a fabric being pulled past its breaking point. Internal chaos takes over the cabin as the plane is forced into a rapid nosedive toward the glowing entity rising from the water. This is the actual mechanism of the triangle. the physical boundaries of reality shatter around the aircraft, swallowing it whole seconds before it hits the water. The expected moment of impact is replaced by total, sudden silence. There is no explosion and no crash. The aircraft remains perfectly intact, suspended in a dark, endless void. There is no ocean, no sky, and no sense of motion. The flight path monitor restores power just long enough to display a single technological taunt, the word triangle. Search teams scan the waters for weeks, finding only empty oceans and unanswered questions. The mystery joins a long list of unresolved disappearances. The victims of the triangle are trapped in an eternal, conscious limbo, systematically erased from our dimension while remaining perfectly intact. The cargo ship Artemis Dawn left port just before sunrise, beginning what appeared to be a routine voyage. No one on board discussed the route out loud, but everyone knew it. Their course cut straight through the Bermuda Triangle. Captain Elias Turner stood on the bridge, relying on 30 years at sea. Experience had taught him that the ocean never acts without first giving a warning. By midday, that warning arrived, in the form of a strange, absolute stillness. The wind died and the waves vanished. This part of the Atlantic is typically restless. For the water to stretch out like a sheet of glass contradicts standard meteorological behavior for the region. While the deckhands whispered that the ocean was asleep, Elias knew better. He saw the dead calm for what it was, the first indicator that they had entered an active trap. By evening, the ship's mechanics began to fail. This schematic of a standard compass face shows the exact progression. The needle shifted a few degrees off true north, then began spinning in a continuous circle. All systems had been verified before departure, leading Elias to dismiss mechanical failure. He recognized the erratic needle meant they had crossed into the deep influence of the triangle. The environment shifted next. Night fell in a matter of minutes, completely erasing the moon and the stars. When Elias ordered the deck floodlights on, the beams barely penetrated the darkness. The air seemed to actively absorb the light, reducing visibility to a few feet. Then, the Artemis Dawn lost all forward momentum. Despite the engines running at full capacity, the ship stopped instantly. The ship was now stationary in the dark, blind, unable to navigate, and incapable of movement. At 11:47 p.m., a distorted radio signal broke the silence. The operator was unable to identify the source of the broken voice pleading for help. This topographical grid shows why the operator went pale. The signal wasn't coming from another ship on the horizon. It was broadcasting from the sea floor, directly beneath the Artemis Dawn. A heavy fog rolled in, carrying a rusted vessel with it. Elias identified it as the Orion Star, a ship that had vanished 22 years prior. The Orion Star did not tilt or take on water. It descended straight down into the depths as if a massive force pulled it from below. Pulsing blue light began to spread beneath the Artemis Dawn, and the ocean's surface bulged upward. An ancient, massive shape rose from the depths. This massive entity hunted the Artemis Dawn, dragging the ship and its crew under the surface. Days later, the military launched massive search operations to sweep the coordinates where the ship was last seen. They found nothing. No debris, no oil spills, and no lifeboats were ever recovered. This total physical erasure turned the Artemis Dawn into a cornerstone of Bermuda Triangle myth. Modern vessels passing through the area still report anomalies. They describe a faint glow beneath the water and a broken radio signal that repeats the same distorted message. The enduring horror of the legend is the implication that these ships are not destroyed. They remain below the surface, with their crews still trapped in the dark. This diagram illustrates exactly how the myth took its geographic shape. In 1952, a magazine specializing in the paranormal arbitrarily connected the Florida coast, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. The author offered no scientific reason for selecting this specific three-sided perimeter. They simply needed a shape to loosely group a handful of unrelated disappearances. The concept found its permanent foothold in a 1964 issue of Argosy, a pulp fiction magazine. The publication took those tragic historical accidents and printed heavily embellished narratives, complete with fictitious quotes and wild suppositions, specifically designed to entertain thrill seekers. To understand the actual ocean, we have to separate the real, documented accidents from the fictional framework that publishers retroactively built around them to sell magazines. The myth relies heavily on historical precedent, frequently citing the 1492 transatlantic voyage of Christopher Columbus. According to the legend, Columbus traversed the triangle and witnessed supernatural fireballs plunging into the sea, while his ship's compasses inexplicably malfunctioned. It is entirely mundane. The marvelous branch of fire Columbus noted falling from the sky perfectly matches the description of a meteor. His crossing occurred in September, a month highly active with shooting stars due to the Earth's orbit and tilt. The malfunctioning compass is easily explained by a known effect called magnetic declination. His crew noticed the needle aligning with magnetic north rather than true north, an alarming but entirely natural physical property of navigation. This map traces Columbus's documented route across the Atlantic. When you plot the coordinates of his log entries, it becomes obvious that both the fireball and the compass deviation occurred in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. He was nowhere near the Bermuda Triangle. Proponents of the myth intentionally strip away this geographical and scientific reality. By removing the coordinates and ignoring basic astronomy, they manufacture a false historical precedent to validate their paranormal narrative. The absolute crown jewel of the legend is the 1945 disappearance of Flight 19, a squadron of 5 Navy planes and 14 crewmen. Their vanishing is often treated as the ultimate, inexplicable event that started the entire phenomenon. But examining the radio logs reveals a cascading human tragedy. The 5 planes were flown by inexperienced student pilots. They were supervised by a flight instructor named Charles Taylor, who assumed command mid-flight when he felt the students were drifting off course. This graphic compares the islands of the Bahamas with the Florida Keys. Taylor had previously been stationed in Key West and was highly accustomed to flying over the Keys. Looking out of his cockpit at the scattered islands of the Bahamas, he made a fatal geographic error and assumed he was over familiar territory. He radioed the tower, saying, "I am sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down." Because he was absolutely certain of his false location, Taylor distrusted his perfectly functioning compasses. Attempting to reach land based on his flawed mental map, he steered the squadron north and then east, flying directly away from the coast and out into the deep Atlantic until they ran completely out of fuel. As for the rescue plane that vanished while searching for them, pre-flight checks showed that the specific flying boat dispatched to find Flight 19 had suffered a malfunctioning engine the day before. Barely 20 minutes after it took off, a nearby commercial ship witnessed an aircraft catch fire and explode mid-air, leaving a massive pool of oil and debris on the surface. Flight 19 was not a paranormal abduction. It was a compounding tragedy of pilot disorientation and mechanical failure that pulp writers later weaponized for entertainment. To keep the mystery alive, the legend continuously manipulates its own boundaries. Consider the famous 5-masted sailing vessel, the Carroll A. Deering. She successfully traversed the entire Bermuda Triangle without incident, only to run aground and be found abandoned hundreds of miles away off the coast of North Carolina. State Department investigations later found that the captain and the first mate had a highly strenuous relationship, with the mate openly boasting he would get the captain. The ship's steering equipment was found intentionally destroyed with a sledgehammer, pointing to an obvious mundane cause, a mutiny. We see the same willful ignorance of evidence with the Star Tiger and Star Ariel passenger planes, both of which disappeared in the late 1940s. Subsequent aviation investigations proved these specific aircraft models suffered from a catastrophic design flaw. They were equipped with a cabin heater highly prone to malfunctioning, creating the very real risk of igniting hydraulic vapor and causing a mid-air explosion. Whenever an incident occurs entirely outside the established zone, like an engine defect or a mutiny, or fuel starvation, proponents simply expand the boundaries of the map on the fly. The physical evidence is ignored to protect the legend. If we strip away the paranormal lens, we are left with the harsh meteorological and physical conditions of the North Atlantic. This data map layers 3 critical hazards over the southeastern United States. First, it is one of the most highly trafficked commercial corridors on the planet. Second, it is a primary route for violent seasonal hurricanes. Finally, it is intersected by the Gulf Stream, a powerful, disruptive oceanic current. When we transform this data into a comparative chart, we see that given the immense volume of boats and planes intersecting with severe weather, the actual volume of accidents in this region perfectly matches standard global oceanic averages. The fatal flaw of the legend is its complete lack of internal logic. These disappearances happen during raging storms and under clear skies. They happen to brand new military aircraft and decades-old sailor. Linking these entirely disparate events requires extreme confirmation bias. It treats a highly congested, frequently stormy maritime hazard zone as a unified supernatural entity. There is a blunt, unforgiving physical law at work here. When massive metal craft suffer catastrophic failures or run out of fuel over deep water, buoyancy fails. They sink into the abyss, leaving absolutely no trace behind. The vast, indifferent reality of the ocean is genuinely terrifying. Against that backdrop, drawing a paranormal shape on a map offers a strange kind of comfort. It gives a face and a name to the unpredictable danger of the sea. The true mystery of the Bermuda Triangle is simply our collective psychological desire to be entertained by fiction, rather than accept the mundane, tragic laws of nature.